It was 1921. America was finally, officially, at peace. The Great War, that mechanized nightmare of poison gas and endless trenches that had consumed a generation, was over. And now the nation wanted a symbol, something tangible to hold in your hand that said, never again. The timing couldn't have been worse for making a coin. Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon was breathing down Mint Director Raymond T. Baker's neck about the Pittman Act silver piling up as dead assets. They needed to strike $1 million a day. A day. To work through the backlog. The old Morgan dollar design had served its time. Why not get rid of two problems in one blow? Strike a new peace dollar and commemorate the end of the war while clearing that stockpile of silver. There was just one problem. It was already late November, and if they wanted coins bearing the 1921 date, they had maybe 5 weeks to pull off what normally took months. Chairman Charles Moore of the Commission of Fine Arts didn't waste any time. On November the 23rd, invitations went out to 8 of New York's finest sculptors. They had until December 12th to submit designs. Barely 3 weeks to conceive, sketch, and model a coin that could circulate for generations. The deadline was brutal. Each sculptor had to create 3 plaster models and pay for professional photography out of their own pockets, all for a measly $100 stipend that worked out to about 25 cents an hour. But this was the United States Mint calling, and that meant prestige, legacy, immortality in silver. Among the competitors was 34-year-old Anthony de Francisci, the youngest of the bunch. He'd recently done the regrettably forgettable Maine Centennial $half, a job that he later dismissed as not very favorable. But he had trained under James Earl Fraser and Adolph Weinman, 2 of the best. His work on the Versailles Peace Medal had shown genuine maturity. De Francisci made a bold choice. He sculpted 2 different reverse designs. One showed a placid eagle holding an olive branch, gazing peacefully towards the sunrise. The other showed something far more dramatic, an aggressive eagle, clutching a sword with its tip broken off, symbolizing the destruction of war's implements. On December 13th, the commission gathered at Fraser's New York studio to look at 24 anonymous designs from 10 artists. 2 uninvited submissions had apparently snuck in. After hours of deliberation and some arm-twisting between Moore, Fraser, and former member Herbert Adams, they made their choice. Anthony de Francisci was the winner. His obverse featured Lady Liberty modeled after classical themes, and, though this made for better press, his 22-year-old wife, Teresa, served as the model. The reverse would use the peaceful eagle, but here is where things get interesting. Director Baker loved the broken sword from the alternate design. He wanted it incorporated into the final version. The sword's broken tip would symbolize the end of war, the olive branch, the dawn of peace. Together, they would tell the story of arms limitation and lasting peace. Everyone thought it was brilliant. The broken sword had appeared on art medals before without controversy. President Theodore Roosevelt himself had championed symbolic, meaningful coinage. This would be the culmination of St. Gaudens's vision for American coins. De Francisci worked through the weekend, making final adjustments. By Sunday, December the 18th, he had 2 sets of finished plaster models. He kept one set with Fraser in New York. The other he'd carried to Washington for presidential approval. Monday, December 19th, Anthony and Teresa de Francisci took the overnight sleeper train to Washington, arriving that morning at Union Station. Chairman Moore met them at the Treasury Building on 15th Street. The day began as a blur of important men in important offices. First, Director Baker, then Undersecretary Seymour P. Gilbert Jr., then Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon himself. Photos were taken, careful to show only the backs of the models. Then, finally, the little group was ushered into the White House between President Harding's pre-lunch appointments. Harding made flattering remarks, quickly approving the designs, and everyone left beaming. It was done. The peace dollar would happen. Fraser immediately took the New York models to Roman Bronze Company to have bronze casts made for $15 each. These would prevent the mint from accidentally damaging the designs during the reduction process. The casts and plaster models arrived at the Philadelphia Mint on December 21st. There was a small hiccup. The reverse bronze cast was a failure, unusable in de Francisci's estimation. But Chief Engraver George T. Morgan was confident that he could use what they had. The obverse cast was a bit rough, but nothing that he couldn't handle. They'd make an electrotype from the reversed plaster instead. Everything was back on track. The press release went out describing the new dollar. Lady Liberty on one side, a large figure of an eagle perched on a broken sword and clutching an olive branch on the other. No photos were released. Treasury officials believed it was illegal to publish images of coins before they circulated, but newspapers ran with the story anyway. Everyone went to bed that night satisfied with a job well done. The early edition of the December 21st New York Herald landed like a bombshell. "The Broken Sword," read the headline, and what followed was 225 words of scathing contempt. Let me read it for you. "A new silver dollar, intended to be symbolic of the era of peace, is about to be minted by the government. This is a good idea, but many Americans must read with regret that the designer, in his effort to picture the idea behind the Washington Arms Conference, represented the American eagle as standing on a broken sword. If the artist had sheathed the blade or blunted it, there could be no objection. Sheathing is symbolic of peace. The blunted sword implies mercy, but a broken sword carries with it only unpleasant associations. A sword is broken when its owner has disgraced himself. It is broken when a battle is lost, and breaking it is the alternative to surrendering. A sword is broken when the man who wields it can no longer render allegiance to his sovereign. But America has not broken its sword. It has not been cashiered or beaten. It has not lost allegiance to itself. The blade is bright and keen and wholly dependable. The unknown editorial writer had struck a nerve. The Great War was still too raw, too immediate to soldiers and veterans. A broken sword meant only one thing: defeat, dishonor, disgrace. The symbolism that artists understood in their studios meant something entirely different to men who had carried real swords into battle. Letters began pouring into the Treasury, the Mint, the Commission, angry letters, offended letters, letters demanding the design be changed. Edward F. Reimer of Near East Relief wrote, and I quote, "Throughout all history, the symbolism of the broken sword is clear and unmistakable. It has always stood for the hauling down of the colors, for defeat, for surrender, and many times for shame and dishonor." The political reality hit fast and hard. They couldn't mint a defeat dollar, not while the Washington Naval Conference was in session, not while Harding was trying to position America as a leader in peace and arms limitation, not ever. December 22nd, late evening, Fraser, Moore, and acting mint director Mary O'Reilly, as Baker was on a train to San Francisco, huddled together to figure out what could be done. The problem was brutal. The reverse hub was already being cut from the electrotype. Working dies would follow soon. They had maybe a week to strike coins bearing the 1921 date. There was no time to create new designs from scratch. O'Reilly wired off an urgent telegram to Baker in San Francisco. Vigorous protests being received against use of broken sword on dollar design. Fraser and Moore suggest same be removed from model. Cost on reducing machine, but change can be made in hub before dies are made and no time will be lost in preparing dies. Will you approve? At 2:24 in the morning on December 23rd, Fraser sent his own telegram to Baker that read, "My dear Mr. Baker, if you deem it advisable under the present criticism, the broken sword could be removed from the hubs before dies are made. That would leave the design as it was originally, simply a peace coin. It would also obviate all criticism from the broken sword idea. I should like this as well without the sword. Yours truly, J.E. Fraser." Baker, trusting Fraser and Moore's judgment from 3,000 miles away, approved the changes. Under-Secretary Gilbert signed off. Treasury Secretary Mellon agreed. Now, someone had to actually do it. Early morning on December 23rd, Anthony de Francisci received a telegram, "Get to Philadelphia now." The young sculptor rushed to the mint, where 76-year-old George T. Morgan was already at his bench. Morgan had been the mint's chief engraver since 1917, though he was employed at the mint since 1876. His Morgan dollar had circulated for over 40 years. He'd seen administrations come and go, watched artistic visions crash against the reality of steel and press tonnage. Now he faced perhaps his most delicate task: surgical removal of the broken sword from the nearly completed hub, with the designer watching over his shoulder, and the calendar breathing down his neck. The work was done under magnification with extremely fine engraving tools. Watchmakers' tools, really. De Francisci and Fraser were sculptors. They worked in clay and plaster at larger scale. This was different. This required the steady hand of a master die cutter. Morgan had to do more than just remove the sword. He had to make it look like the sword had never been there. He strengthened the sun's rays where the sword tip had been. He extended the olive branch backwards to cover the alterations. He removed a piece of the stem near the eagle's talon, sharpening the leg and foot. Part of the work was done on the hub, part on the master die. De Francisci watched all day as Morgan worked his magic. By late afternoon, it was done. The modified design went back up the chain. O'Reilly to Gilbert to Mellon, approved, approved, approved. Baker wires his consent from California on Christmas Eve. A press release went out that same afternoon. In view of the inquiries which are being received in regards to the new silver dollar, the director of the mint desires to state that the Philadelphia Mint is now proceeding with the coinage of the dollar, and that the new coin will be available on or about December 30th. The sword, which appeared on one of the models submitted, does not appear on the coin. Morgan's work was so skillful that it would take numismatists over 85 years to detect that the 1921 peace dollar dies had been altered at all. December 28, 1921, at 8:30 a.m., Mint Superintendent Freya Steyer sent a telegram to Director Baker in San Francisco. First peace dollars struck at 8:30 this morning, coining successfully. Anthony de Francisci stood in the coining room as the pressers banged out the first high-relief coins of his design. This first specimen was reserved for President Harding. In 4 days, working around the clock with multiple presses, the Philadelphia Mint struck over 1 million peace dollar coins. The output was staggering. More than 250,000 coins per day. Treasury Secretary Mellon's silver problem was being solved, and America had its peace coin after all. On January 4th, 1922, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York released 75,000 peace dollars to the public, one per customer. Lines formed. People waited eagerly to hold the new coin, to run their fingers over liberty's radiant crown and the proud eagle surveying the sunrise of a new era. The New York Herald crowed in a follow-up editorial. Congratulations are due to those in Washington who were quick to acknowledge that it would be a mistake to represent the sword of the United States as broken. De Francisci gave away all 50 of the coins he had ordered from the mint, keeping his promise to his artist friends who'd joked about his chances. He didn't even keep one for himself. Morgan had touched up the lettering during his emergency alterations, creating the slant top A's that appear inconsistently on 1921 peace dollars, a quirk that collectors would puzzle over for decades. But Morgan knew something else too. Those high-relief dies were gorgeous. Fraser called them the culmination of St. Gordon's vision, but they were murder on the presses. Dies that should last 200,000 strikes were breaking after only 25,000. The coins didn't stack properly either. The metal flowed unevenly, creating fins along the rim. On January 3rd, Morgan was already working on a lower relief version for 1922. He wrote to de Francisci, and I quote, "I know you will be disappointed, but the pressure necessary to bring up the work was so destructive to the dies that we got tired of putting new dies in." De Francisci was not happy. He wrote back emphatically, if the relief was too high, reduce the whole design proportionally by machine. A very simple process. Do not make artistic changes to the dies. But the decision was already made. The 1921 high-relief peace dollar would be a one-year type. Starting in 1922, the designs would be flattened. The details softened, the relief lowered to match the old Morgan dollar design. The coins that circulated for the next 13 years would be beautiful. There's no questioning that. But they were a compromise. The 1921 peace dollar, struck in crisis, altered in panic, produced in a breathless rush, remained the truest expression of de Francisci's vision. Somewhere in New York, before the Midnight Crisis, Roman's Bronze Company had successfully cast at least one bronze of de Francisci's broken sword reverse. It was one of the items Fraser had ordered for $15. The cast, the only known original bronze of the approved broken sword design, would vanish into history for 95 years. In 2016, a Pennsylvania antiques picker found it. He originally didn't know what he had, just an old bronze disc. heavy, about 7.5 inches across, with an eagle and a broken sword. He sold it, and it changed hands until someone brought it to expert John Danrover at the 2018 Long Beach Expo. Danrover examined it at length. The dimensions matched, the weight matched, the design matched the galvano in the Mint's archives. Even a small flaw on the rim near the O-in-1 appeared on both pieces, evidence that they'd been made from the same plaster model. In my opinion, and based on currently available information, Danrover wrote, "The item pictured above is the genuine original bronze cast model prepared for the US Mint in 1921 by Peace Dollar sculptor Anthony de Francisci and James Earl Fraser." Numismatic scholar Roger Burdett concurred with that opinion. Secrecy of the Mint Bureau and Treasury Department and limited access to archival documents virtually eliminate any chance of the subject item being a counterfeit piece. The bronze cast, the ghost of what might have been, survives as a window into one frantic week when art, politics, and panic collided at the US Mint. It remains the only physical evidence of the peace dollar Americans never got to carry in their pockets. The coin with the broken sword, the symbol that meant two different things to artists and soldiers. The design that a midnight editorial stopped before it could be born. So then, when this bronze cast finally appeared on the open market for the first time in more than a century since its creation, it was sold by Heritage Auctions at their August 2025 ANA US Coin Signature Auction event, when it was able to raise $132,000 by the auctioneer's final call. The 1921 peace dollar is one of the most beloved coins in American numismatics. Over 1 million were struck in just 4 days. Each one carries in its surface the ghost of George Morgan's steady hand, working under magnification in the early morning hours of December 23, 1921, carefully erasing a sword tip that had become, overnight, a symbol of defeat. Most collectors will never know they're holding a coin that was altered in crisis. But now, you do. And when you run your fingers over that eagle, standing proud on its mountain perch, clutching an olive branch in its talons, you'll know there used to be a sword there, a broken sword, and one man's midnight editorial changed history.